Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Arab Digest podcast. I'm William Law, editor of the Digest, and my guest today is the Kurdish American journalist Sirwan Kajjo. Sirwan is a regular contributor to the podcast, and I'm delighted to say he'll be joining our great team of analysts as a regular contributor to our daily newsletter. Sirwan, welcome aboard the newsletter and welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, Bill. Thank you for having me back.
Can you briefly recap for our listeners what happened beginning 6th of January with an attack on two predominantly Kurdish neighborhoods in the city of Aleppo?
Sure. The Syrian Democratic Forces and the Syrian interim government had been negotiating a March 10th, 2025 agreement for the past few months. And the idea was to integrate the SDF, the Kurdish-led forces, and its institutions, its civilian institutions, into the Syrian state. There had been many hurdles in the process. And until January 6th, while a meeting was happening in Damascus between the two sides, the meeting was interrupted. I guess there was no breakthrough made. And shortly after that, we saw the Syrian government forces attacking these two Kurdish neighborhoods in Aleppo, Sheikh Maqsoud and Ashrafia.
And how long did that attack last, Sirwan?
After 3 or 4 days, the two Kurdish neighborhoods fell completely under the control of the Damascus government. And after that, things almost got out of control with the Syrian government forces marching east toward other SDF control areas in eastern Aleppo, as well as places like Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, and all the way until much of, I would say, at least 2/3 of Kurdish-held territory in a span of 48 hours fell under the control of Damascus-backed groups, including tribal forces that were aligned with the SDF previously.
It happened, as you say, so quickly, 48 hours, and much of what had been under SDF control east of the Euphrates now has fallen into the hands of al-Shara. I'm just wondering, Sirwan, to what extent did Arab resentment at the way they were being treated by the SDF contribute to this very quick Syrian army success?
Yeah, greatly. The Arab population was not content with the SDF rule over their region. We're talking particularly about Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, and these are almost entirely Arab majority. And yeah, there were certain grievances, tensions, ethnic tensions between the Kurds and the Arabs. And the fact that, the new dynamics also encouraged some local Arab tribes to start preparing and showing willingness to integrate into the new Syrian state, regardless of whether the SDF, succeeds in the negotiations with Damascus. So, the circumstances were right from a tribal or Arab perspective in those areas to basically switch sides and join forces with the government forces. Now, I should say that throughout the Syrian conflict, especially after these areas were liberated by the SDF and the global-led coalition from ISIS, the SDF did not have a direct rule. I mean, yes, Kurdish commanders were in charge of major issues when it came to security and governance, but local councils, like, for example, the Raqqa Military Council and the Deir ez-Zor Military Council, these were directly responsible for providing security and other types of services to the local population. Yet, apparently, local Arabs still did not want any involvement with the SDF, at least in the past year after the collapse of the Assad regime and the arrival of al-Shara and his allies in Damascus.
I mean, I've read about accounts of Arabs being arrested, an atmosphere of repression and growing resentment that made it quite easy for al-Shara's forces, as you said, the tribes just joined up with the al-Shara forces. Was there a degree of repression that fed the resentment that the Arabs were feeling?
Yeah, the SDF is not necessarily a democratic force. They have not only against Arabs, but also security forces have also been repressing many Kurdish activists that are not affiliated with the SDF and its ideology. Things were only more complicated because it had an ethnic dimension in those Arab majority areas like Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa. So yeah, there is a level of truth to that matter. There was a growing anti-SDF sentiment, which I believe why we didn't see much resistance from the SDF in those areas as al-Shara forces advanced into territory held by SDF and its affiliated groups. Essentially, they retreated from most of those areas without putting up a fight. So they did understand the changing dynamics. Hence, it was a very, very rapid takeover.
Yeah. You've mentioned this already that the SDF was the crucial element really in the battle to defeat ISIS, and it was heavily backed by the United States over several years. So I have to ask you, Sirwan, what happened to U.S. support for the SDF?
Since the arrival of al-Shara in Damascus, the United States decided to support this, new government. It was a meeting back in May 2025 between President Donald Trump and the interim president of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, in Riyadh that basically changed things for everyone in Syria, including the SDF. And later on, in November of the same year, al-Shara came to the White House, had another meeting, and then joined the anti-ISIS global coalition. The United States decided that in Syria, there's only one group that we can work with. While they continued their partnership with the SDF, they made it very clear that in the future, if there is any way for the SDF to continue the partnership, it would have to be through their integration into the Syrian government and the Syrian state writ large. But recently, after the outbreak of the violence in Aleppo and later on in eastern Syria, the United States made it even more clear that it's over for the SDF. If they do want to join the Syrian military and the Syrian state, then they should do so by, joining individually, not as an intact force, which has for a long time been a major demand for the Kurdish led forces and also a major point of contention between Damascus and the SDF. But it's become clear that the United States no longer supports the SDF, at least in the way it did in the past decade in the framework of the fight against ISIS.
So yeah, a big shift there. What about the Israelis? Now, you mentioned to me before we started this recording that there was a meeting in Paris between al-Shara's foreign minister and the Israeli foreign minister, and that happened the same day that the attack on those two Kurdish neighborhoods in Aleppo commenced. So that was on the 6th of January that these two foreign ministers got together in Paris. Give us some details on that and what that represented.
So there's been a lot of talks about whether there was any relationship between the meeting in Paris between the Syrian side and the Israeli side and its impact on the ground, and especially with relation to the SDF and the attacks on those two Kurdish neighborhoods in Aleppo. The Syrian government made major successions to the Israelis, for example, by establishing a security arrangement between the two sides where the Israelis will keep a level of presence, military and security presence in parts of southern Syria, at least in three provinces, Quneitra, Sueda, and Deir ez-Zor, as well as certain other, intelligence sharing agreements between the two sides. Now, in return, and this is being reported, I wasn't in the meeting, but the Israelis were basically did not object to carrying out an attack or an offensive by the Syrian government against the Kurds because the Israeli had been very vocal in terms of supporting the Kurds and other minority groups, particularly the Druze, in the face of, attacks by the Syrian government and allied forces. Of course, an Israeli official came out and said that that was not the case. The Israelis did not endorse the attack in Aleppo and elsewhere against the Kurds. So it remains a speculation. And there's a lot of room for interpretation of why that happened from the Syrian government side. Syria, especially with this Islamist-led government, there is still a level of animosity toward Israel, a sentiment towards Israel. And some would say that the attacks in Aleppo coincided with the agreement to kind of cover that and distract people from discussing these other, issues that almost for many people sounded unofficial normalization with Israel.
Yeah, wow, that would be a big step, particularly since, as you said, the Israelis have presence in three southern provinces, and it seems that al-Shara is not making much noise about that. So I look at it, Sirwan, and I think, well, the U.S. withdrawing its support for the SDF, and Israel and al-Shara doing a deal, it would appear to me that the Syrian Kurds have been betrayed on several fronts. Is that how you see it? And what are the terms of surrender, if I can put it that way?
Well, I should say the United States, since the beginning of this partnership with the SDF a decade ago, has been very consistent in terms of defining their relationship with the Kurdish-led forces, that this was a transactional partnership. This was not meant to be a strategic partnership in the context of giving an opportunity for the Kurds to establish a lasting autonomy in the Northeast. And this was reiterated recently by U.S. Special Envoy to Syria, Tom Barak, that it was meant to be in the context of fighting ISIS. And he basically said that that partnership expired. And many Kurds would like to call this a betrayal, but from a U.S. perspective, everything was clear from the get-go. From the minute the United States under the Obama administration decided to support the Kurds directly in the fight against ISIS, it's remained in that context, even though that partnership has allowed the Kurds to expand territory and build institutions that function in a de facto capacity in the Northeast. And so, yes, from a Kurdish perspective, Kurds have been a loyal partner to the United States and other Western powers. And in return, they expected a more assertive support in the post-Assad era that they think did not happen with the withdrawal of support from the SDF.
And what about the Israelis?
The Israelis, I'm not sure if there was any direct contact between the Kurds and the Israelis in that context, even though certain, senior Kurdish leaders expressed openness and willingness to cooperate with the Israelis in different fronts, including the security file, but they didn't really Kurds in general didn't count on Israeli support, knowing that Israel would not, make any significant progress towards the Kurds if they did not have backing from Washington. The presumed Israeli support was conditioned on how much Washington sanctioned that kind of relationship.
Yeah, so Washington is the key here, and as you said, transactional, and Tom Barrack made it very clear. This is it. Our support is finished. We're walking away from you. We're supporting al-Shara. It's a take it or leave it. That's where we are.
That's basically what happened. The United States still maintains about 1,000 troops in the region, although some of them have been moved around, given the changing dynamics in the Northeast. So there is still a U.S. military presence. I don't know how much effect that will play, given that the Syrian government forces have taken over much of the territory that was controlled by the SDF. And so, yes, if there is any support for the Kurds in the future, it will probably be in terms of forcing them to continue this integration process, even though prospects for that, or at least going back to the March agreement or to the January 18th ceasefire and its points, the United States remains determined that any integration of the SDF into the Syrian state will have to be by terms dictated by Damascus.
Mm. So there's a ceasefire in place now. How is that looking?
Not really good. I mean, it was announced about 5 days ago. There have been many violations. Now, both sides accuse each other of breaching the ceasefire. The SDF documented at least 52 violations by the Syrian government and their allied forces. The Syrian government also says that the SDF continues to breach it by waging attacks in certain areas and along the fault line between the two sides. So it's very shaky and it contributes to the deteriorating humanitarian situation on the Kurdish held side, especially in the town of Kobani and other Kurdish held territories in the northeast.
You're listening to the Arab Digest podcast with me, William Law, and the Kurdish American journalist, Sirwan Kajjo. For more on what Arab Digest has to offer, head to our website, arabdigest.org, where you can find details on how to receive our daily newsletter for 2 months for free. Check us out at arabdigest.org. And Kobani was one of those towns controlled by ISIS, and it was an extremely bloody fight, as I recall it. But look, there are people listening to us thinking, well, ISIS was defeated. It's no longer a threat. But Sirwan, you and I both know that's far from the case. But what has happened with the prisons and those camps that were holding ISIS fighters and their families now that the SDF has been defeated? What's happening there?
Yeah, even before it was entirely defeated, the SDF announced that it will no longer, guard those detention centers and camps. Basically, it no longer had an interest in doing so, given the changing environment and elsewhere in the region. So they were immediately taken over by the Al-Sharaf forces, including the Al-Hol camp, which is the largest camp holding thousands of families of ISIS militants, including many foreign citizens. Now, it's a chaotic situation in certain prisons, like in Shaddade, which is located in the southern part of Hasaka province. A prison break happened and many ISIS prisoners were able to escape. Some of them were captured by the Syrian forces. Others remain at large. So those would eventually pose a threat, not only to the Kurdish region, but also to areas under al-Shara control. And you also have these other, thousands of families, including women and children, that have been held in these camps. Most of them still hold a ISIS extremist ideology, so they do pose a direct threat to the security of the region and regional security as a whole. Some of them have been moved to Iraq. The U.S. said that Iraqis have initiated a process of, taking as much as 7,000 individuals from Al-Hol camp. Now that's major, but we also hear some opposition voices within Iraq basically saying that it's not a good idea, even though Iraqi officials say that this is a temporary arrangement until there is, a process where these individuals are repatriated to their home countries. All in all, it's a very chaotic situation because, yes, like you said, Bell, the ISIS was defeated territorially, militarily, no longer held territory, but they've been very active since 2019, and especially in the Syrian desert, what is known as Al-Badia. We have seen an uptick of ISIS activity in those areas, especially after the collapse of the Assad regime. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but the threat is very real. And given that the Syrian government has shown it doesn't have the capacity to counter ISIS, at least because some members of the Syrian military are former ISIS, former Al-Qaeda, and some still hold extremist ideology. So it's dangerous in that sense as well. We will see how the U.S. and its Western allies will deal with this situation, but it's certainly one of great significance on the long run.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned that there are former ISIS who may not be former. When I think about it, in the Syrian armed forces, I'm also told that the security services there are ISIS sympathizers, fellow travelers, whatever you want to call them, and the threat, of course, to Iraq, to Syria, beyond those borders. I'm thinking about Europe. The ideology has not been defeated, has it?
No, it has only seen a resurgence in the past few months for these reasons that you mentioned, Bill, that even though official ISIS narrative opposes al-Shara's government and they think it's an apostate regime, a puppet regime that is loyal to the West, but still many within ISIS, people who are sympathize with the group, still believe this is a chance for the group to trying to have a resurgence in many parts of Syria. And we see that online. We see that I saw some reporting on camps holding ISIS families celebrating the fact that the brothers are coming for us, things like that. So there is a sense of victory among people, including those who are still in Kurdish custody. This is definitely something that Western officials should consider if they are concerned about their own security, in Europe in particular, given
Mm,
that many of these individuals do come from European backgrounds.
yeah, yeah, those foreign fighters, very, very concerning. That when you think about it, ISIS could reemerge. What a nightmare scenario that would be. But finally, Swan, I wanted to ask you about women fighters in the SDF because they made a huge contribution to the defeat of ISIS. I wonder what their situation is, and more broadly, the situation for women in Northeast Syria now that the al-Shara government has won the battle and the SDF has been pretty much defeated.
Yeah, there is a great deal of concern on this issue, especially with the women fighters. It was also part of the one point of contentions between the two sides during the integration negotiations between Damascus and the SDF, how to integrate these female fighters that have been effective in the fight against ISIS, and also how they will be part of a military whose core is made up of jihadists and many extremist elements. Now, it will be interesting to see how the Kurdish units, the YPJ, will react to these changes. I've seen some interviews by their leaders then saying that they're not disarming themselves. They will remain as an intact force, especially as they see all these ISIS prisoners, escaping and others who have expressed a desire to retaliate against, especially the female fighters and within the SDF. Over the past decade, the SDF and its civilian institutions built a progressive, maybe not entirely democratic, but a progressive entity where women enjoyed equal rights on all levels, leadership and otherwise. And so women, including people and with family members that I have there, are really concerned, afraid about what would happen if these forces take over the rest of the Kurdish region and take away the newfound freedoms that the Kurds built for themselves, especially for women. It's also another real concern that people are grappling with at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Lots of concerns. And still, the whole situation very much in flux. And the direction of travel, well, what? Does it look pretty grim right now for the Kurds in Syria?
The offensive was planned very effectively on the part of the Syrian government that they were able to cut off Kobani from the rest of the Kurdish region in the northeast. So that way, Kobani is basically under siege. In the remaining Kurdish region towards the border with Iraqi Kurdistan, there is one border crossing that Syrian government media are talking about it right now. So the aim is to try to close that border crossing, even though it remains under Kurdish control. If that happens, that will be very, very difficult, especially as we see on a daily basis aid convoys coming into Syria from Iraqi Kurdistan, from aid organizations, local and governmental, that have been essential for not only for the locals in the Northeast, but for many who had fled before and after this violence from other places in Raqqa and Tabqa. I'm talking about Kurdish residents, including people who have been displaced at least 4 times from Afrin and Aleppo and the two Kurdish neighborhoods, and most recently from Hasaka. So it's a very grim situation on the ground. People are optimistic, but there isn't much prospect for a lasting ceasefire unless the United States shows more willingness to engage the two sides and bring about a political resolution to this. Many believe that if there is a complete military takeover of the remaining Kurdish region, the situation will only get worse, and the solution has to be political, no matter who wins on the battlefield.
Yeah, you said people remain optimistic, and as you mentioned, you have family in the Kurdish region of Syria. Where is the optimism coming from, Sirwan?
I would say that the growing impressive level of solidarity from Kurds and other parts of Kurdistan, particularly from Iraqi Kurdistan, Bill, like if you see, like I've been following Kurdish politics for all my life, and I haven't seen anything like this. The level of support, political and financial, from all political parties across Kurdistan and from people on all like from all walks of life. It's just a very encouraging. It's united in the Kurds. If this offensive did anything, any benefit to the Kurds, is that it unified them around one cause in Syria. And so people believe that this momentum could be turned into something more tangible, especially that the leadership in Iraqi Kurdistan has been very effective in terms of communicating what's happening in the northeast of Syria to the rest of the world, but also becoming active with the Syrian government, with the Americans, with the others. So Iraqi Kurdistan, Erbil, has become a major point of diplomatic efforts on behalf of the Syrian Kurds.
And Kurds are resilient, Sirwan. We will see where it goes, but for the time being, thanks so much for talking with me today.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate the opportunity.
My guest today on the Arab Digest podcast was the Kurdish American journalist Sirwan Kajjo. Arab Digest is an independent voice on the Middle East and North Africa. No sponsors, no advertising. Our support comes only from our subscribers. With all that's going on in the world and the huge challenges independent media is facing as the US and other democracies tilt towards authoritarianism, we need your help. We need your support. Head to the website, arabdigest.org. See what we have to offer you with our team of analysts, folks you will not find anywhere else. And while you're there, check out our offer of a free 2-month trial to our reader-supported daily newsletter. Follow us on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn, and search our library of more than 300 podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or other platforms. The podcast has had more than 250,000 listens since our launch, and we thank you for listening. I'm William Law, editor of the Arab Digest. Essential reading, essential listening from independent sources.